They laughed when the waitress looked at the impossible code. But she saw what the world's greatest minds had missed. Each line she drew rewrote 20 years of failure. By the end, they weren't laughing anymore. Everyone in Japan had heard about it in the Morimoto seminar. The event that was supposed to change everything. Inside the Grand Hall of Hoshin University, hundreds of the country's smartest minds sat, waiting, professors, scientists, reporters, each of them hoping today would be the day someone finally cracked the mystery that had haunted research. Labs for 20 years, the Morimoto sequence. When Daiichi Morimoto walked in, the crowd fell silent. He didn't need to introduce himself. Everyone knew the man who built an empire on technology and power. He wasn't just rich, he was feared. Morimoto walked straight to the front, his expression unreadable. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. 20 years, he said slowly, his voice echoing through the hall. 20 years and still no one can solve it. He glanced across the rows of scientists sitting stiffly in their chairs. I've given you everything, funding, equipment, freedom. Yet the sequence still laughs at you. The audience shifted uncomfortably. No one dared respond. He looked toward Professor Takeda, the lead researcher, an older man who had spent half his career on this single problem. Tell me, Professor, Morimoto said, are we any closer today than we were 5 years ago? Takeda swallowed hard. We've made progress, sir. The final pattern still resists our models, but Morimoto interrupted, his voice colder now. Resists? Or exposes your incompetence? The professor's face went pale. Laughter stirred in the back of the hall, nervous, forced. Everyone could feel it, the tension, the fear of saying the wrong thing in front of a man who could destroy their careers with a single call. Morimoto turned toward the large projection of the sequence, a maze of symbols and numbers glowing on the wall. I built this project to prove that human intelligence could outthink the machine. But maybe, he said softly, we're not as intelligent as we like to believe. He paused. Let's hope someone in this room proves me wrong. A chill passed through the hall. Not a single person moved. Outside, rain started tapping against the tall glass windows, soft at first, then harder, like the world itself was listening. And somewhere near the side of the room, a quiet young woman in a black waitress uniform carried a tray of tea, trying not to draw attention. She wasn't supposed to be part of this story. But before the night was over, she'd become the only name anyone would remember. Aya Kubo moved quietly between the rows, the soft clink of teacups barely cutting through the heavy silence that followed Morimoto's words. Everyone looked tense, eyes fixed on the screen, faces tight with pressure. She'd served at dozens of university events before, but this one felt different. The air itself seemed sharp, filled with pride and fear. She set down a cup in front of a professor whose hands trembled. He didn't even notice her. No one did. They never did. Aya had learned to blend into the background, smile, nod, move on. That was her job. But as she turned toward the front of the hall, her gaze caught the massive display again. The Morimoto sequence. A storm of symbols. Lines and numbers flashing across the dark background. The scientists stared at it with frustration, but Aya, she lingered. Something about it felt oddly familiar, like a rhythm she'd heard long ago. Careful, a voice whispered sharply. One of the assistants frowned as she poured tea near the front. Don't spill near the devices, Aya nodded quickly. I'm sorry, she said softly, stepping back. Her eyes dropped, but her mind didn't. On stage, Morimoto's voice filled the hall again. If none of you can find the pattern, maybe there isn't one. Maybe the sequence is proof that even human genius has limits. Some of the scientists exchanged embarrassed glances. A few scribbled in their notebooks just to look busy. Aya returned to the side of the room, holding the tray close to her chest. She wasn't supposed to listen. She wasn't supposed to care, but she did. Every word Morimoto spoke hit something deep in her, a memory she'd buried years ago. Back then, she used to dream about sitting in rooms like this, not serving in them. Back then, she studied algorithms in late-night libraries, tracing shapes and formulas across notebook pages until her vision blurred. Back then, before everything fell apart. Morimoto stepped closer to the audience now, lowering his voice. I didn't gather the brightest minds in the country for nothing. Someone in this room must have an answer. No one moved. The silence stretched long enough for the rain outside to grow louder, drumming against the glass. The sound filled the gaps his words left behind. Aya looked once more at the screen. Her breath slowed. The sequence didn't look random at all. It looked like motion, something shifting every few seconds. A hidden rhythm disguised by complexity. She blinked, stepping back quickly. What was she thinking? She was a waitress, not a scientist. Still, as she turned to leave the hall, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answer everyone was searching for had been right there, waiting for someone who wasn't afraid to see it differently. And at that moment, Daiichi Morimoto glanced toward the back, just as Aya paused by the exit. His eyes narrowed, almost curious. He didn't know why, but something about the way she looked at that screen didn't feel ordinary. The storm outside cracked like a warning. Something was about to change. The tension was so thick that even Aya felt it pressing against her chest. She turned slightly, her gaze slipping once more to the glowing code. Her eyes followed the lines. The way they curved, mirrored, repeated. She didn't even realize she'd whispered out loud. "It's not random," she murmured. "It's rotating." The sound was barely audible, but it reached him. Morimoto straightened. "What did you say?" Aya froze. The tray in her hands trembled. I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to—" "No," he said, stepping closer. His voice softened, but his eyes stayed sharp. "Repeat it." All eyes turned toward her now. Dozens of professors stared, confused. The billionaire was talking to a waitress. Aya swallowed hard. "I just said, it looks like it's rotating. Like the sequence shifts after every few lines." A few quiet laughs rose from the front row. Someone muttered, "She thinks it's a pattern." Morimoto didn't laugh. "You see rotation?" "I might be wrong," Aya said quietly. It moves like it's meant to fold into itself." The billionaire stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that wasn't kind at all. "So, my staff is now joining the discussion?" "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered again, lowering her head. "I'll leave," but Morimoto raised a hand. "No, stay." He turned to his audience. "Perhaps we should let our waitress show the experts how it's done." Laughter filled the hall again, louder this time. Aya's face turned red, but Morimoto kept watching her, almost intrigued. "Tell me, what makes you so sure about this?" "Rotation?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Every word from him felt like a test she didn't sign up for. "Nothing to say?" he asked softly. "That's what I thought." He turned back to the board, ending the moment. The laughter faded. The presentations continued, but the air had changed. Because behind her lowered eyes, Aya wasn't humiliated. She was thinking. And deep inside, she knew she'd seen something real, something no one else in that room had. By the time the seminar ended, the air in the hall felt heavy, like a room after an argument. The professors filed out quietly, carrying their laptops in bruised pride. Morimoto shook a few hands for the cameras, his smile polished but hollow. He hated wasted time more than failure. Aya stayed behind, cleaning up the untouched cups and plates. She worked slowly, hoping no one would notice she hadn't left yet. As she stacked saucers, she could still hear Morimoto's words echoing in her head. "So, my staff is now joining the discussion?" The laughter, the way they all looked at her like she was a joke. She closed her eyes for a second. She had promised herself never to think about equations again, not after what happened 5 years ago. Not after the project she'd built from scratch was taken away before she could defend it. But that code on the screen, it wouldn't leave her mind. She glanced around. The hall was nearly empty now. Only 2 assistants were packing up equipment at the far end. The rain outside had turned steady, drumming softly against the tall windows. Aya hesitated, then stepped closer to the main display. The Morimoto sequence glowed faintly in the dim light, scrolling across the giant monitor like something alive. Her heart beat faster. Each row of numbers seemed to follow a pulse, a rhythm that the others had missed. She reached out and touched the edge of the screen, tracing the symbols in the air. "Rotation," she whispered again, "not random. Recursive symmetry." She looked at the repeating symbols, each one twisting into a mirror of the last. It wasn't a pattern made to be solved. It was a pattern meant to move. Behind her, a voice spoke. "You're still here." Aya spun around. Morimoto was standing by the door, one hand in his pocket, watching her. The assistants were gone. It was just the 2 of them. I was just cleaning up, sir," she said quickly, stepping back. Morimoto nodded slowly. And cleaning requires analyzing my code? She froze. Her fingers tightened around the tray. I'm sorry, I shouldn't. Relax, he said. His tone wasn't angry and just curious. Tell me, miss, what's your name? Aya Kubo. He repeated it under his breath. Aya. Then he walked closer, stopping a few feet from the screen. You said it was rotating. You still think that? Aya hesitated, then nodded once. Yes, sir. Morimoto's gaze flicked to the glowing equations, then back to her. You have confidence for someone who serves tea. It's not confidence, she said softly. It's just, I see it differently. He studied her in silence for a long moment. Then he smiled faintly, not mockingly this time, but with something else behind it. Interest. Fine, he said finally. Show me what you see. Aya's breath caught. Sir, I'm not qualified. Neither were they, he said, gesturing toward the empty seats. And they had 20 years. The storm outside flashed white against the windows. Aya stood frozen, staring at the man who had just turned her quiet thought into a challenge she never asked for. Her life had been ordinary until tonight. But standing in that empty hall, with the code glowing before her and the billionaire waiting for an answer, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, Aya Kubo wasn't invisible anymore. The hall was quiet now, except for the rain and the faint hum of the computer. Morimoto stood with his arms crossed, watching Aya like a man testing a theory. She sat slowly at the desk, her reflection faint on the black screen. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. It had been years since she'd touched a code interface, but her muscle memory returned faster than she expected. The rhythm, the structure, the way numbers could dance if you looked at them right. Morimoto broke the silence. You do realize this code has outlasted entire research teams, yes? Yes, sir, she said without looking up. And you're still going to try? She nodded once. You asked me to, he smirked. Fair enough, Aya began typing. The assistants had left the algorithm interface open, lines of raw data stretching endlessly across the screen. She studied the sequence again, eyes moving fast. Everyone else had tried to predict the pattern as if it were static. But if she was right, the pattern wasn't staying still. It rotated. She adjusted a few parameters, changing the order, shifting the orientation of one section by 30 degrees. The screen flickered. The sequence shifted slightly, forming a new set of symbols. Morimoto leaned in. What did you just do? I aligned it, Aya murmured. Your team was analyzing the surface structure, but it's layered. Like origami folds. Every rotation reveals something hidden beneath. He frowned. Origami folds? Aya's lips curved faintly. You're looking at a two-dimensional problem in three-dimensional space. The billionaire didn't reply, but his eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, watching her fingers move faster across the keys. Lines of numbers began aligning on the screen. Slowly at first, then faster, like magnets finding their match. Morimoto's voice dropped. Impossible. Aya didn't hear him. Her world had narrowed to the screen and the quiet rhythm of keys. This was what she'd missed. That pulse of discovery. The feeling that logic could breathe. Then the computer beeped. A soft, unexpected tone. On the main display, a fragment of the sequence glowed white, perfectly aligned. For the first time in 20 years, a portion of the Morimoto sequence had stabilized. Aya stopped typing, staring at the screen in disbelief. It worked, she whispered. Morimoto said nothing. He just looked at her. The waitress who had done in 10 minutes what his scientists couldn't in 2 decades. His expression was unreadable, but his pulse had quickened. He walked to the front of the room, pacing once. Who taught you this? Aya hesitated. No one. He turned sharply. Don't lie to me. Her hands tightened on the desk. It's something I used to study, she said finally. A long time ago. Morimoto's eyes searched hers. Where? She looked away. At a university that no longer remembers my name. Silence. Only the rain filled the space between them. Then quietly he said, Continue. Aya turned back to the screen. The glow reflected in her eyes. This time she didn't hesitate because she knew. If she stopped now, she'd fade back into the shadows forever. And she was done being invisible. I was 22, she began. A research assistant. We worked in a cold basement lab that smelled like dust and old coffee. They said our project could change the world. Code that could recognize its own flaws and rewrite itself. She paused, her breath shaky but controlled. We called it patterned intelligence. My name was on the original paper, until it wasn't. Morimoto's expression tightened. They took it from you. Aya's faint smile was bitter. They took everything. The code, the credit, the chance to finish it. I was just the assistant, the girl who fetched coffee. And when I spoke up, I was told I misunderstood the work. Outside, thunder rolled. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves knew they were hearing something forbidden. Morimoto looked down, his jaw rigid. And you think my sequence came from that? Aya turned toward him. I don't think, she said softly. I know. For the first time, the man who owned 1,000 patents, who had bought entire research teams, didn't have words. She continued, her tone quiet, but unshaken. I never cared about the fame. I cared about being seen, about knowing my work mattered. And tonight, when that code lit up, it remembered me even if no one else did. Morimoto's voice was low. Why didn't you speak sooner? She gave a small sad laugh. Would you have listened? A waitress claiming she wrote the code that baffled your best scientists? He didn't answer. The silence said enough. The lights flickered again as the storm outside deepened. Aya gathered her worn bag, slinging it over her shoulder. I don't want anything from you, she said, her voice steady now. Not money, not credit, just the truth in the data, that it was never lost. As she turned to leave, Morimoto finally spoke, softer this time. Miss Sato, he said, using her full name for the first time. If what you're saying is true, the world will know. Aya paused at the door. Rain framed her silhouette, the quiet strength of a woman who had already won. It doesn't need to, she whispered. The code already does. She stepped into the storm, and inside, Morimoto stared at the glowing screen, where beneath the solved equations, faint text shimmered, created by Sato. By morning, Tokyo was awake to a storm of headlines. Waitress solves 20-year mystery. Morimoto code cracked by unknown woman. From cafe apron to genius. Who is Aya Sato? Every news anchor repeated her name with disbelief. A woman who wasn't a scientist, who didn't belong to any university, who had stood quietly in the back of a seminar and solved what the brightest minds couldn't. At Hoshin University, the same hall that had echoed with applause for Daichi Morimoto the night before was now flooded with reporters, cameras, and uneasy whispers. Morimoto stood at the podium, shoulders stiff, his eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. Behind him, the solved Morimoto sequence glowed across the massive screen, proof he couldn't deny. He faced the crowd. Last night, he began, voice low but steady. A woman named Aya Sato achieved something extraordinary. She solved the sequence, alone, without assistance, without a laboratory. The flashes blinded him. Questions flew from every direction. How did she do it? Was this staged? Did you know her before last night? Morimoto hesitated. No, he said at last. I didn't. The room stirred. He took a breath. She wasn't part of my research team or any academic institution. But what she did changes everything we thought we knew about intelligence and discovery. It wasn't just praise. It was surrender. Across the city, in a quiet tea house far from the cameras, Aya sat by the window, a soft rain blurring the glass. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls from journalists, universities, even government officials, but she didn't answer any of them. She still wore her waitress uniform beneath a worn cardigan. Her apron hung neatly beside her. On the table, her old laptop, scratched, taped, and slow, sat open. Lines of the solved code shimmered faintly across the screen. Aya stared at them, expression unreadable. It's strange, she murmured to herself. When the world finally looks at you, you don't feel seen. Just exposed. The door chimed behind her. She didn't turn, but she heard the voice, a calm, tired, familiar. Miss Sato. It was Morimoto, standing in the doorway, umbrella dripping, suit soaked at the shoulders. For the first time, he looked smaller than his reputation. I shouldn't have come, he said, but there's something I need to show you. Aya frowned slightly. You already showed the world everything. He shook his head. No, the sequence isn't finished. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. After you left last night, The system started running again. The code you entered began rewriting itself, creating new patterns. It's like it's alive. Aya's brow furrowed. That's not possible. I stopped it. I thought so too, Morimoto said. But there's something else. The system keeps generating one word over and over. He handed her a folded printout. Aya unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the letters. At the bottom of the page, written across a string of glowing numbers, was a single name. Kento. Aya's breath caught. For a moment, the world went still. Kento Takahashi, the man she had loved, the one who had died years ago during the same scandal that ended her career. Her fingers trembled. She whispered almost to herself, "It's calling him." Morimoto looked at her, unsettled. "Who is Kento?" Aya's eyes lifted to his, calm, sad, and unflinching. "The man who helped me build it," she said softly. "And the one your company erased." The rain hadn't stopped. It slid down the windows in thin silver streams, whispering against the glass like something alive. Aya sat still, the paper trembling in her hand. The name printed across the code glowed faintly on the laptop screen. Kento. As if the machine itself was breathing his memory back to life. Morimoto stood a few feet away, uncertain, watching the woman who had undone his legacy. "Who was he?" he asked again, softer this time. Aya's eyes didn't leave the screen. "Kento Takahashi," she said quietly. "He was a researcher. Brilliant, kind. The only one who believed my theories made sense. We built the foundation of this algorithm together. But when the funding was pulled and the data was stolen, he tried to expose it." She stopped. Her hands clenched. "They called it an accident. But I never believed that." Morimoto's throat tightened. He knew what she meant. The kind of silence corporations bought with fear. Aya took a shaky breath. "Before he died, Kento sent me a file. Said it was just old work, a fragment of our early code. I never opened it. Couldn't bring myself to." She turned to her laptop now, eyes sharp with something between dread and hope. "But this," she gestured toward the screen. "This isn't random. The code is reacting to his signature." Morimoto leaned closer. "You mean, it's trying to finish what we started?" Aya typed in a few commands, her fingers steady despite the pounding in her chest. The equations on the screen began to shift again, rearranging themselves, lines moving like light underwater. Then slowly letters started to appear, not numbers, not variables, words. "If you're reading this, it means you solved it." "I knew you would, Aya." "They can steal the credit, but they can't erase the truth." Her breath hitched. The letters glowed brighter, filling the screen with a message that pulsed like a heartbeat. The sequence was never meant to be a weapon or a patent. It was a map to show how chaos learns to heal itself. And so can you. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, reading the lines over and over until they blurred. Morimoto looked away, guilt flickering across his face. "He left this for you." Aya nodded, voice breaking. "He left himself in it." Outside, thunder rolled again, but it sounded softer now, distant. She saved the file, closing the laptop gently as if tucking away something sacred. Morimoto straightened his coat. "Miss Sato." "I can make this right. I can clear your name, credit your work." She shook her head. "It's not about that anymore. The code doesn't belong to anyone. It's meant to be free, like he wanted." She stood gathering her things. Her apron, her coat, her quiet dignity. At the door, she turned one last time. "You once said the code was unbreakable," she said softly. "But it wasn't. It just needed someone who remembered why it was written." Morimoto said nothing. He only watched as she stepped outside into the rain, not defeated, not triumphant, but whole. The screen behind her flickered one last time. Lines of code faded slowly until only one sentence remained, glowing like a final heartbeat. "To Aya, the pattern that learned to love." And then it was gone. Weeks later, the world still spoke her name, but Aya had returned to the quiet, pouring tea, living simply at peace. Because sometimes solving the impossible isn't about genius at all. It's about remembering why you began. If you felt Aya's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. And thank you for watching. Please comment below from where you are watching our stories.